Hi, this is Denise, Area 50, Panel 72, Delegate to the General Service Conference. In this section, I will be discussing the recommendations and the committee considerations of the Conference Committee on Literature. This is going to be a long one. So the Literature Committee had 19 various items on their agenda, and some of which had various subparts to it, and that was even after a number of the newer items were reallocated under the equitable distribution of workload to different various other committees of the conference. This committee came back with 9 recommendations that went to the full floor of the conference for vote, and an additional 12 committee considerations. So on this first slide, there's 3 of the additional committee considerations. The first one is in reference to the Recovery Literature Matrix, which is a matrix that shows the different books, pamphlets, flyers that we have available, and what type of format they're in. So the committee went through that and made some recommendations. The committee also encouraged the Trustees Literature Committee, with whom it works very closely and gets its reports from, to continue their efforts to make our literature accessible in different formats, and provided suggestions for e-literature and other accessible digital platforms, including Liquid Mode PDF for mobile screens. The committee also looked at the draft of the Literature Committee Workbook. As some of you may know, that our literature committees are a committee that do not currently have an approved workbook, so that is underway, and they made some suggestions and asked for a draft to be brought back to the 2023 General Service Conference. Okay, so here's the first of the recommendations. So this recommendation was voted on by the full conference floor, and this was the agenda item about the pamphlet questions and answers on sponsorship, which is one of our existing pamphlets. And there was a recommendation to add the text about safety, the first point of which was talking about what a sponsor does and doesn't do, and the second point was concerning how sponsorship helps a group. So for Area 50, this particular item was an item that was included on the delegates questionnaire, and out of the groups who did discuss this with their GSR and did register a response on the delegates questionnaire, we did have a substantial unanimity to have this added. So here's an interesting thing. For the vote, I voted yes in accordance with what I heard, and also with what our informed area conscience was. The vote was 106 votes yes and 24 no. There was a motion to reconsider after some debate. It was seconded. My vote on that was yes, that I did want to reconsider. And the reason for that was, in the discussion on the floor, there was a discussion pointing out in the first bullet point, where it refers to service material, which is safety and AA, our common welfare. And that's what changed my mind. This was a service piece that had been updated in the fall of 2021, and then was re-updated. Apparently, it did go through the regular updating procedure, but it still went out, and a lot of people had some problems with some of the content that was in that safety flyer. But what that did for me was that changed my my outlook on this. So I voted to reconsider the vote. And then there was a motion to amend. My vote was no. And that amendment was to change from that specific flyer, safety and AA, our common welfare, to referencing other AA material on service. The motion to amend failed. Then there was a vote to recommit this back to the committee. So what that means is it goes back to the corporate board and they have a chance to work on it and then potentially bring it back to the conference the following year. So I voted to do that. I thought that was a good idea to send it back to one of the corporate committees. The recommitment needed a 2/3 vote. It did not get that, and the minority voice is not heard for a recommitment. And I just kind of pointed that out, that is Robert's rule. It wasn't that we didn't do something we were supposed to do. So then there was a vote to accept the amendment. My vote was no. It was not accepted. And so what we ended up doing was going back to the original vote, and the original vote was voted on again. It was 101 to 28. So that's substantial unanimity, and it remained passed. So that item was passed and becomes an advisory action. So let's look at the next item. Okay, so the second recommendation was about safety language being added to living sober. This was an item that was on our delegates questionnaire, and we did receive substantial unanimity by the smallest little margin on that. There was no discussion on the floor. Nobody of the whole conference had any discussion on this. I voted yes. The vote was 114 votes yes, 6 votes no. Just as with any other item in here, there was an ask for a minority opinion. There was none offered, and this passes with substantial unanimity. Okay, the next item was a consideration. So the committee looked at a draft pamphlet, and this is a pamphlet that we have been underway with. It's a pamphlet, a new pamphlet on the 3 legacies. And this began as an advisory action of the 2018 General Service Conference. And they looked at a pamphlet and asked that a report or a draft pamphlet or progress report be brought back to the committee in 2023. Okay, next is a committee recommendation. The draft pamphlet, the 12 Steps Illustrated, be approved. And the committee had discussed this in full and had some minor editorial revisions that they wanted to have done. So we were able to see a draft copy of this, and there was a very large ensuing conversation about this on the conference floor. And I will say that of all the committee recommendations that the different committees brought to the conference floor, I believe there was only 3 that were not passed, and this was one. I voted yes to accept the draft, as did the committee. I felt that the committee had talked about some of the changes that they wanted to do, and I felt like the committee would carry through with those. It was things like being more diverse in the religious overtones. There was a conversation that some of the imagery was too Christian, and that they wanted freedom to be expressed maybe a little less literally, removing shackles, and then things like adding color to the pamphlet. So I voted yes. The motion did not pass. So what happens with this is that that kind of dies. So what happened was that a floor action was brought up on this, and it was recommended that the Trustees Committee on Literature continue to make edits to this pamphlet and then bring a draft back to the 2023 General Service Conference. I voted yes on this. The vote was 108 yes, 11 no, and this did pass. So through the floor action, and this was one of only 2 floor actions out of 9 floor actions that was ultimately approved by the conference. Okay, the next item was a committee recommendation to approve that we adopt the video of the pamphlet, The 12 Steps Illustrated, which is currently published by the General Service Board of AA in Great Britain, and that we adapt it and produce it by our publishing department and bring a progress report or a rough cut of that video back to the 2023 General Service Conference. This was an item that was covered in our delegates questionnaire, and of the groups who did discuss this item, 100% of the groups approved adapting that. So I voted yes. The vote on the floor was 121 yes votes, 10 no votes. And there was a minority opinion about translating to French and to Spanish. The motion did pass, 92.4%. This becomes an advisory action. The next item was a committee consideration. So the committee reviewed a progress report on our existing pamphlet, Too Young, and what the committee recommended. And this was a pamphlet that's been under revision since 2017. It was a floor action in 2017 to revise this pamphlet. So the committee recommended that a progress report or draft pamphlet be brought back to the 2023 Conference Committee on Literature. Okay, the next committee recommendation was that the draft of the pamphlet, Young People in AA, be approved. I voted yes to this. Vote was 111 yes votes, 17 no, and this item passes and becomes an advisory action. Okay, the next 4 committee considerations were to, after review of draft progress reports on these 4 items, to bring back a progress report or a draft pamphlet or manuscript to the 2023 General Service Conference. And this was on the pamphlet, which is an existing pamphlet, AA for the Black and African American Alcoholic, which is being updated for language that is more appropriate, and to update the stories in the pamphlet to better reflect our Black and African American fellowship. AA for the Native North American, the same thing, updating some of the language and making sure that the stories reflect our membership. And then 4th edition of the Spanish version of Alcoholics Anonymous is being updated for stories. And then Alcoholics Anonymous English version is being updated to a 5th edition, and that is going to include updated stories to better reflect our membership, as well as additional content in Appendices 3 and Appendix 5, which are the appendices on the religious view and the medical view of AA. So we look forward to seeing 4 reports or drafts in 2023.